Welcome to this presentation on interoffice communication. Today we're going to talk about some general concepts that we want to think about as we create legal documents, and we're going to talk particularly about formatting issues. So let's get started. One important idea is we need to use your firm's format. Many firms, of course it'd be nice if I could spell, you're going to do a much better job spelling than I am. Here we go. Use your firm's format. Lots of firms have things called style manuals, sometimes called style books. Not all firms have them. There are some commercially available style books. Probably the best example is the Red Book by Brian Garner, who's very well respected in the legal field. But there's lots of other choices out there. Many law firms come up with their own style manual. What a style manual is it gives the paralegals and attorneys and secretaries a kind of set of rules of the road about how they should format legal documents. So, for example, there will be a set memorandum style that all memoranda that are produced by the law firm are going to have a certain format associated with it. And anyone who varies from that is not producing one that is in compliance with the company. Now, excuse me, it's a law firm. Now, it may well be that the format is going to be the same for every single paralegal and attorney who produces a document for that law firm. Of course, the content will be dramatically different. The form manual doesn't say anything about the words that you're picking in terms of the content, although they will give you rules about grammar and things along those lines. So it will give you templates, basically, formats that you should follow. It'll give you rules such as what font to use, what margins to use. Now, you will be using your firm's formatting whenever you're producing something that is going to go to someone other than to a court. But obviously when you're filing in a court, you're going to follow the court's rules. And these rules are usually called, oops, here, let me go back here. These rules, oops, I didn't do a very good job there, I apologize. Imagine that I did a better job. That's follow the court's rules. And the place that you'll find the court's rules are the local rules. And we'll go and look at some local rules as we progress. But they're usually quite easy to find, and they will tell you sometimes rules such as you've got to use this font, or this particular document can only be this number of words long, or things along those lines. So you need to follow your firm's style manual when you are producing a letter to a client or opposing counsel, or you're doing an internal memorandum. But when you're dealing with courts, your firm will not want you to follow the style manual for the firm if it violates or is in some kind of contradiction with the local rules of the court. You always follow the court. That's probably the biggest rule that you'll find in the style manual is follow the court. Okay. So that's the first thing. Now, there are many, many law firms, that, particularly smaller ones, that may not have sophisticated style manuals. So you may find yourself having a much more informal process when you're doing this. For example, you may simply ask somebody who's been around for a while, what style memo do you use? And then you might just cut and paste their style memo format and use that going forward. Or perhaps there really isn't any kind of template to use, so you may decide, well, I'm going to create my own. One recommendation is whatever you come up with, use it consistently. And so it might be worth a little bit of effort to think about, well, what would a good style look like? And again, one thing perhaps to go to is to think about using the Red Book by Brian Garner. That's an easy kind of fill-in-the-blank book that will give you some good rules of thumb to think about if you don't have any other resource to look at. But usually you're going to probably start out when you begin following the style that other people in the firm have done, even if it's not formalized into a style manual. And you want to be consistent. You won't want to use font A on Monday, font B on Tuesday, font C on Wednesday, unless, of course, different courts are requiring that you use different fonts. So that's the first thing. Follow your firm's formatting rules if they exist. The next rule is be consistent. It kind of follows from that. It's more important that you be consistent than you have the absolute best formatting rules. There really isn't a best style. There's lots of different factors that go into it, and the important thing is that it be a reasonably good one. But the styles that I'm going to show you today and that we'll be seeing in other units, other modules, there's nothing magical about them. Perfectly reasonable people could come up with somewhat different formatting, and they would not be wrong to do so. There's nothing magical about what I'm going to do. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to assume that the style manual for your firm is the content that I'm going to be covering. So you do need to follow it. You can't say, well, gee whiz, I think it would be better if we used a different font here, or I think it would be better if we used different margins. You might well be right, but you need to follow the style manual of your firm, even if it's not the perfect style manual. So let's talk a little bit about fonts. There's lots of different ideas about fonts. I will tell you the safe bet to do. Of course, the first thing to do is check out your style manual. What fonts does your firm use? But most firms are going to use Times New Roman. This is a very safe font to use. Usually people are going to use a 12-point font. Brian Gardner will recommend that you use a 13-point font. But certainly a 12-point font would be very safe. I'm going to recommend that you use a Times New Roman 12-point font. And the reason why I'm recommending that is not because there's something magical about it, but people who use this are very mainstream. If you produce documents in this font, people are going to say, oh yeah, that looks like what a legal document ought to look like. So for the purposes of this class, use Times New Roman 12-point font going forward, unless we talk about there being a reason to use a different font in a particular circumstance. So you may be thinking to yourself, I've never really thought about fonts. I don't even kind of know what the factors are that people ought to think about when they're looking at fonts. I am going to switch on over to a different, I'm going to switch on over and share my desktop with you so we can play around with fonts for a second. I'm going to open up a fresh document, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a font. Now, Word loves some sans serif fonts. Let me first of all type that up here. I'm going to start with Arial. Here we go, Arial. And I'm going to make it big so it's easy to see. And I'm going to type the word sans serif. When you see the word sans serif, when you see this, you can see it looks kind of like the way your handwriting would be. Let me type this same phrase in Times New Roman. And I'm going to also make it an 18. Sans serif. And of course, this isn't a sans serif font. This has serifs on it. And what a serif is, let me blow it up even bigger so we can really make it clear, is what a serif is are these little, on the S, is this little line right here in front of the S. At the beginning and the end of letters, you'll see a little cap or a little line at the bottom to kind of show you that it looks different. But when you look at the Arial font, there are no initial strokes and there's no final strokes. It's the way that you might write these letters if you had really, really neat handwriting. You would never draw on these extra little doodads at the beginning and end of letters unless you're writing calligraphy. So one thing about serif writing, and as I said before, this I'm going to take away the sans because this is really just serif writing, has these doodads on it. Many times people think of sans serif font as being more informal because it copies more like handwriting, whereas serif fonts look more elegant, maybe look fancier, they look more like calligraphy. Generally speaking, it is easier for people to read a lot of text if they have the serifs in it. And let me give you an example of this. Let's say I'm going to do this first in Arial, a sans serif font. I'm going to write, I love you. One of the first things you notice here is the difference between the letter I and the letter L, lowercase, is almost no difference at all. The I looks a little bit thicker, maybe. Let me remove the space here and bring them closer together. You can see there's almost no difference. In fact, when my son was first learning to read, whenever he would see a capital I, he would want to say the L sound because he had been used to seeing sans serif books. And for him, the capital L, capital I looked like a lowercase L. It sure did, given that experience. Let me give another example of a sans serif example. We'll do the word Illinois. And you can see in here that with the capital I, Arial will give it a little bit more space, so there's a little bit more spacing between the capital I and the lowercase L's. But other than that, there's really no difference. So if I'm abbreviating Illinois, you might think that I'm writing the Roman numeral 3 if you're not looking at it very closely. Let me write these same things in a Times New Roman. I love you. You can see immediately the capital I looks different from the lowercase L. You would never confuse those two. Your eyes know that those are two very different letters. And when I do Illinois, again, you immediately see the difference. If I abbreviate Illinois, you're not going to confuse that with the Roman numeral 3. So that's one of the ways that we are able to more easily read a font with serif. So you want to use a font with serifs on it. Now, one thing that Brian Gardner, who is this kind of writing guru, will say is it's sometimes a good idea to use headings that are a sans serif font. And sometimes you can mix two different fonts. But we're going to keep it straightforward in this class. We're going to use Times New Roman 12 point. Okay, now let me show you how you do points. Okay, we've already picked Times New Roman, and I'm just going to go down here and pick 12. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. Times New Roman 12 point. And I'm going to now do 13. You actually have to type in 13. Times New Roman 13 point. An interesting feature of the points is that while if you're in the same font, if the number gets bigger, it will always be a bigger size font, but it doesn't necessarily follow that an Arial size 13 font will take up the same amount of space. I'm doing Arial now, Times New Roman. Obviously, it's going to confuse me saying Arial. I'm typing this in. But you can see this is Arial 13 point, and it actually is quite a bit longer and looks quite a bit bigger than Times New Roman. So it doesn't follow that all 13-point fonts are exactly the same in terms of their spacing. I'm going to drop this down to a 12, and you can see really an Arial 12 point is the same size as the Times New Roman 13 point. So you'll find usually a 12 point or a 13 point is where you want to be. But for this class, this is the gold standard. This is what we're doing. Okay. So we've talked about fonts. We've talked about the size of the font. Let's talk a little about some other issues that you will want to think about in terms of your documents. One thing you'll want to think about is the margins that you're going to use. Now, I am not a word guru, but I'm going to introduce you to some things about Word that you are going to need to know about for the purposes of this course. And so I'm going to introduce you to a few concepts today, and I'll introduce you to other concepts as we go forward. So the version of Word I have has the type of information I'm going to show you right now by clicking on the File button. There are different places for this depending upon the version of Word that you have. Once I get in here, I'm going to go down here to the bottom. I'm going to click on Options. And this is going to give me choices about how to display things. One thing about Word is that it is a general purpose software tool, a word processing tool. It is not especially designed for legal work. As a result, the features that it has sometimes aren't the most helpful features for legal work. And so as a result, it's sometimes useful to tweak these features to make adjustments to them because Word can be adjusted in lots of different ways. If you don't do anything to change the settings, there's a default setting that they have. But a lot of times you're not going to be happy with the default setting, and you are empowered to make these changes. So let's talk about them. You can see the first thing that comes up is general, and this gives you some choices here. I'm going to go to display, and you can see it says it shows the white space between pages in print outlet view. You may say, well, why would I want to see the white spaces between pages? Shows highlighter marks, shows document tooltips and hover. I like to have all of this data, but you don't have to if you don't want to. I also like all of this information in here. So I'm going to elect to have this stuff on here. I'm going to hit OK. If I don't hit OK, I'm not going to save this. Now you can see the document looks different. Because I have a space here, it shows the space. Now if I print this up, it won't print this little dot in the middle. That's simply to let me know there's a space, because let's say I had accidentally hit the space bar twice. If I wasn't showing this space, I'm going to turn this off for a second so you can't, oops, wait a second. I'll go back here to options. I'm going to turn off the spaces. There. I might not immediately know that there's two spaces there. Maybe there's three, maybe there's two. It certainly requires a lot more work, and of course, what I can do is I can just hit this paragraph sign it and get it to show up. So this can be a good way when you're editing your work. It's best to have this feature off when you're drafting, because this is annoying to see. It really interrupts your flow, and it makes it more difficult for you to read and check your work. But when you're near the end and you're making sure, are my margins right? Are there extra spaces? Are there figures that I don't need to have in here? If there's some formatting that I'm having to fight against, this can be a good way of finding that stuff. So let's go back to File and look at some more neat things. I'm going to go to Options. We've looked at Display. I'm going to look at Proofing. Word has an idea about how you want your documents to look. But again, Word is not thinking legal documents. It isn't going to know about legal terms that you're putting in that are not part of the everyday dictionary that it has. But you can add words to your dictionary. Let's say you routinely use the word tort. Here I'm going to cancel this. I'm just going to type the word tort. I don't know if this is in the dictionary or not, but tort. Okay, it likes that word. But let's say I say res ipsa loquitur, which is a legal expression. Well, it doesn't like ipsa. It's underlined. It's saying you've misspelled that word. Let's go over here. Let me do a review, and I'm going to do a spelling check. Oh, look, it's telling me ipsa is incorrect. That's going to get annoying if I routinely use the word ipsa. So I am going to add ipsa to my dictionary. Now it's in my dictionary, so now I can type res ipsa loquitur, and it's not going to tell me it's a problem. Now, of course, if I was really typing spa and I accidentally type ipsa, then it's not going to tell me that I have a typo. So you don't want to include every single possible word in that. For example, I will tell you the word the. I routinely misspell T-E-H. I'd say half the time I do it that way. If I were to put T-E-H into the dictionary, I would end up with a lot of typos in my documents because I need the computer to tell me, wait a second, that's not what I want. So I like the fact that it's going to correct my word, but it might sometimes be the case that I'm typing the word I mean to type. Maybe it's a Latin word, maybe it's some other technical word, but Word thinks it knows better what I want to do, and it changes it automatically, and that's not very helpful for me. So be aware of that feature. Let me go back to Options, and let's go to Proofing. Show readability statistics. This is another thing. I like to do grammar and style for writing style. I'm going to go to this is going to comma required before last list item. This is called the sequential comma or the Oxford comma. Punctuation required with quotes. We want to check. spaces required between sentences? This is kind of a controversial issue. The best practice now is to have only one space between sentences, but you may find your style manual of your firm might require two, so you could have two there. And these are all the things that they're going to check, but there might be some of these things you don't want them to check because you think they're going to routinely get it wrong. So anyway, so I've made some choices here. Now I'm just going to type a few things. The boy was bitten by the dog. Can you see it put it in green? Wonder what that means. Well, let's do a check of our document. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to do review. I'm going to do a spelling and grammar check. It doesn't like the fact that I have 2 words in a row. Well, you know what? There are times in the law where you do have 2 words in a row, so this particular rule you might not want to have in your list of rules. I'm going to go to the next one. What they don't like about this one is they don't like the fact that it is impassive. And so they're coming up with a suggestion. But we can look at this and go, this is not English. Dog bit the boy. You know, maybe the dog bit the boy might be a good sentence. But their suggestion, if I accepted it, I'm going to just accept it so you can see what it's like. Actually, they did make it into a better sentence. The dog bit the boy. Many times they won't change it exactly the way that you think it ought to be changed, but it's going to give you an idea. So these can be helpful tools to use as you go forward. This is a readability statistics, and this is a very helpful editing tool. It's going to give you the word count. Many times when you're writing legal documents, you have a number of words that you have to stay under, and so knowing the number is a very helpful thing. It also tells you the characters. This isn't so useful, but it can tell you how many characters per word. My average word is only 3 characters long. Those are pretty short words. I mean, you can see in this list. Here, they're going to let me go up here. Maybe not. Oops. Okay, they're not going to let me do that. But you can see I'm using pretty short words. But if I find that, you know, my average characters per word is like 10 or 12, then that's a sign that I'm using kind of some long-winded words. That's not a good practice. Now, you don't need to have your average characters per word being 3, but you want to have it somewhat on the low side because, of course, every sentence is going to have the word the. Many sentences are going to have and or a or an or of or is. So there's going to be some words automatically that are going to be short. And you don't want your words to be too long. You want your sentences to be easy to read. You can see we have 5 words per sentence. Well, that's pretty low. It's not dangerous